L'shana tova umetuka. May we have a good and sweet year. My name is Reb Minster, and I'd like to tell you about the time I was banned from the Unorthodox Facebook group because someone thought I was a Christian missionary. Now, many of you don't know me, so let me assure you, with all due respect to our non-Jewish family and friends, that I am not now, nor have I ever been Christian. So why was it that someone thought I was a Christian missionary? Well, since becoming a rabbinical student, I have been flooded with enthusiasm for God's grace. Now, I can hear what you're thinking. God's grace? Is she Meshugana? What kind of a goyish thought is that? Let me assure you that I came to this understanding Jewishly. El Rachum V'Chanun. God, compassionate and gracious, is part of the 13 attributes of the divine. It's in Exodus chapter 32, after the golden calf incident. And we proclaim those attributes at the beginning of the Torah service during the high holy days. So how can we see grace in our lives? Well, I have 2 kids. And when my youngest, Ezra, is 5, and when he gets really frustrated and claims that school is boring, I have to remember that the logic of a 5-year-old is not the same as the logic of a 43-year-old. And my older kid, Jack, is 8, and he's a perfectionist, comes by it naturally from his mother. So I have to help him work through that with some grace to avoid frustration. How else can grace manifest in my life? Well, when I take a breath and stop myself from picking a fight with my husband, Chung Mao, that's when I feel God's grace touching me. You know, I quit my job to go to rabbinical school. And when I remember the financial weight on Chung Mao's back, it helps me to have more compassion for him. Now, I look and study God's grace and compassion deeply. I think about descriptions of the divine as a blueprint for how I should act in the world. And the reason that I focus on these 2 attributes so much is that they don't come naturally to me. Tzedek, justice, that's my jam. In college, I separated myself from Judaism because I didn't feel like it was fully encapsulating the justice that I wanted to see in the world. I had only learned a really simple understanding of the Bible and a plethora of ritual that had no meaning in my modern life. In fact, I found it really frustrating that people proclaimed things in synagogue and then acted completely differently in their regular life. And then one day, I was stopped in my tracks. In my mid-20s, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. There is nothing like a cancer diagnosis to make you think, what is really important in life? What gives my life meaning? Is there going to be a point to it all when I'm no longer here? That's when I decided that I needed to go looking for answers. And the most logical place to look for answers to deep things, for me, was in synagogue. And slowly, I started to live more Jewishly and sink more deeply into Jewish wisdom. And slowly, I made the decision to come to rabbinical school. Now, before I became a rabbinical student, I was a political activist, and I held on so firmly to my political ideology that I failed to see the humanity of the people around me. Crisis looms large in our lives today. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that the pandemic has upended all of our lives. And yet, we can break free from pandemic malaise and come back to ourselves by allowing space for God's grace. In the book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, we're reminded that doing good does not necessarily mean that you'll have a lot of money or even that you'll live a long life. So why should we do good? What makes that meaningful? To me, the idea of doing good helps me become better and feel better about myself and about my time on earth. And so when we talk a lot in our liturgy during the High Holy Days about the book of life and the book of death and how we need to be written into the book of life, it's easy to become cynical and say, I don't believe that. But is there a way to take it seriously without taking it literally? I think so. Because when we take the idea of reviewing our lives seriously, then we get serious about being the best versions of ourselves. At a recent Shabbat service, Dr. Jackie Green reminded us that this is the greatest time to look over your calendar. Think about all your interactions with people during the last year. Did you say something that was a little harsher than you meant it? Were you so anxious about your own life or about the world around you that you gossiped or spread a rumor that you wish you could take back? This is the time to reach out and apologize to people. It's also the time, if you're holding a grudge because someone said something that struck you so deeply, for you to go and ask that person for an apology. Doing these kinds of reconciliations help us clean the slate and start our year fresh. That's what it means for us to write ourselves into the book of life. Now, it is wonderful to hold on to grace and to allow grace and love to flow through us to the people around us. We can do this together. Teshuvah, returning to ourselves. Tefillah, through prayer, tzedakah, and through our financial obligation to our collective future. Now, you might be wondering what happened after I was banned from the Unorthodox Facebook group. Well, I ended up having a phone conversation with the producer of Unorthodox, Josh Cross. I admitted that I could have been more gracious in my discussion about people's thinking that grace had nothing to do with Judaism, and Josh admitted that there are more than one way to do Jewish. In fact, our conversation and reconciliation became an example for him of Talmudic dialogue, the age-old Jewish idea that disagreements can be for the sake of heaven. And he mentioned it on the Take One podcast, which is one of the many podcasts that Tablet Magazine produces about the Talmud. We became Facebook friends, and I was welcomed back to the Unorthodox Facebook group. I hope that a little bit of my story helps you realize that it's never too late to turn around and to come back to the person that you've always wanted to be. If I can be a 43-year-old student, imagine what you can do. L'shana tova umetuka. May we co-create a sweet and good year.